I call this June 6th meeting of the Paducah Planning and Zoning Commission to order and ask that you stand with us, please, as we say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Mr. Irvin, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am. Benberry.
Here.
Bradford.
Here.
Morrison. Schramke.
Here.
Shadle.
Here.
Wade.
Here.
Chair Crecilius.
Here. Ms. Schramke, I believe you have the minutes motion.
I move that the reading of the minutes for May 16th, 2016 be waived and that the minutes of said meeting as prepared by the secretary be approved as written.
Second.
Second by Wade. Are there any corrections? Call the roll, please.
Schramke.
Aye.
Shadle.
Aye.
Wade.
Aye.
Benberry.
Aye.
Bradford.
Aye.
Chair Crecilius.
Aye. Mr. Bradford, you have the Kentucky Care Clinic waiver.
I do. I move that this commission receive and file the application of Kentucky Care Clinic for approval to waive 2 parking spaces at 125 South 20th Street pursuant to section 126-71, subsection B2 of the Paducah zoning ordinance. I further move that this commission find the waiver of 2 parking stalls shall have no negative impact on the property, and according to Mr. Jones, the architect, a drive-through window will mitigate the need for 2 parking spaces, and many patients of the clinic utilize public transportation, and the Planning Commission has approval to waive the parking requirements at 2501 Kentucky Avenue. I further move that the application be approved.
Second.
Second by Shadle. Anybody have any questions?
What was it? Did you read 2501 Kentucky Avenue?
That's correct. On the staff report, it says 125 South 20th,
Okay,
but that's not correct.
okay, but it's not. What is the actual address?
250. What's that? Is it 120 South 20th? Is that correct? Okay, it's 120 South 20th. 125 South 20th.
Okay,
That is correct. Okay.
25 something Kentucky Avenue is out by the
Shall
hospital.
I amend?
All right,
the
that's-
The
motion?
motion is flawed?
No,
Let's look at,
I believe it's fine.
You read 2501, I thought.
I read both, actually.
2501 Kentucky Avenue is the Western Baptist Hospital, and that's not where this is. So, it would be at 125 South 20th Street, I think would be accurate.
So we need to
Do we need to amend the motion?
Yes.
I'll amend my previously made motion and to say at the end, the Planning Commission has approval to waive the parking requirements at 125 South 20th Street.
Second.
Second by Benberry. You ready for a vote?
Yes.
Okay, we're voting on the amendment, change the address. Call the roll, please.
Schramke.
Aye.
Shadle.
Aye.
Wade.
Aye.
Benberry.
Aye.
Bradford.
Aye.
Chair Crecilius.
Aye. Now, the main motion. Does anyone have any questions concerning the waiving of the 2 parking spaces?
So we waived 2 before, and we're waiving an additional 2.
That's correct.
So in essence, we are waiving almost 10% of the of what is required.
Originally, there was 41 required. I believe the Planning Commission waived 2 originally. This request is for an additional 2 parking spaces.
Okay, if I look at the plan, it says, unless I'm missing, that there are 36 available. So that would be 5
Well,
difference.
would that also include on-street parking?
I don't think so. Then they would have numbered that, and
They
that would
should have.
certainly, and that certainly would have taken them to the 41. I know I'm splitting hairs here, but if there were 41 required and this plat shows that there are 36 available, unless I'm missing one, then we should be waiving 3. 2 plus 3 equal 5.
Correct.
On the bottom left part of the plat, it shows where what could be a space is labeled as striping. I don't know if that was previously supposed to be a spot. Maybe they were including that in account previously, but I see what you're saying. Yeah, the plat shows 36.
And that is part of the 2, where the striping is, that they're wanting to waive as part of this application. It's quite possible that from the original parking waiver, and that was actually built on site, that there was one less than what was originally required by the previous action by the Planning Commission.
Perhaps we'd waived 3 before,
Well, the original action was 2, but there was only,
40 required.
there was 41 required, waived 2 down to 39, but on site, there was only 38 actually built. So what you're saying, though, is correct, though, because there's only 38 built on site built, that it's a waiver of 3 instead of 2. I think your initial correction is
Because we
correct.
can't correct a mistake
No. That they made,
that they made if they built only 38
exactly.
before.
To approve the plat as proposed does show 36, you're correct. They had a waiver down to 39, I believe, so it would actually require a waiver of 3 parking spaces with this action.
So I believe we need another amendment to the
That's correct.
motion.
Does staff have any problem with a waiver of 3 versus 2?
I don't, and typically, most of the parking waivers that come before the Planning Commission or before staff, I typically like, if they're substantiated with a drive-through, I think we'll see some of that traffic come off of the parking lot, just for the reason that I hate to see wasted urban space, meaning parking spaces, and you see that in a lot of places around town. So I don't think that the 5 that they're requiring with the adequate space for drive-through is going to be a concern.
You think the drive-through will alleviate someone parking going in to get these, whatever it is, the supplies, where now, if we approve it, they've got the ability to drive through and they don't have to park?
That's correct.
That's the reason that,
Yes.
Mr. Bradford, would you like to amend your motion?
I don't, let's see. We've had so many votes already that I almost forgot that I made this motion. But yes, I would like to amend it to state that there are 3 parking stalls instead of 2. I can read back the entire motion in its correct form now that we've amended it twice, if the commission would like.
Well, we have to amend it first,
Okay.
but the motion to amend would be appropriate.
Is there a second on that?
Not yet.
Second.
Second by Wade. Now, if you'd like to read it back with the amendments, that would be appropriate.
Sure.
Oh, wait, we need to have a vote first.
Yep.
Let's vote on that amendment.
Go ahead. Bradford?
Aye.
Morrison? Schramke?
Aye.
Shadle?
Aye.
Wade?
Aye.
Benberry?
Aye.
Chair Cornelius?
Aye.
Okay, I'll now read the motion as amended twice. It shall read, I move that this commission receive and file the application of Kentucky Care Clinic for approval of 3 parking spaces at 125 South 20th Street pursuant to section 126-71 subsection B2 of the Paducah zoning ordinance. I further move that this commission find the waiver of 3 parking stalls shall have no negative impact on the property, and according to Mr. Jones, the architect, a drive-through window will mitigate the need for 3 parking spaces, and many patients of the clinic utilize public transportation, and the Planning Commission has approval to waive the parking requirements at 125 South 20th Street. I further move that the application be approved.
Second.
That's already been seconded.
It's already been seconded, but we're ready for the main motion, I believe. If there's anything else any comments anyone would like to make?
I do have just a clarification, Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
On staff comments, they compared a different facility where they removed 2 spaces to this one, saying that, it worked fine there, and therefore it would here. Now that we're talking about 3 spaces instead of 2, do you still have the same conclusion?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments, questions? Call the roll, please.
Bradford.
Aye.
Schramke.
Aye.
Shadle.
Aye.
Wade.
Aye.
Benberry.
Aye.
Chair Casilius.
Aye. Mr. Shadle, we have the City of Paducah public hearing on the zoning text amendment for Section 12676 signs.
Yes. I move that a resolution titled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by amending Section 126-76 signs," be adopted.
Second.
Second by Ben Berry. This is a public hearing, so if there's anyone who'd like to speak either in favor or in opposition to the motion. Do you have any comments for us, Mr. Irvin?
Yes, thank you. Really, there's 2 parts to this text amendment for sign regulations. The first is to establish new regulations for ghost signs. Right now in the City of Paducah, if somebody wanted to restore a ghost sign, which we have defined as a sign that was constructed before 1966, they really couldn't do it because our existing zoning regulations would really define that as an advertising sign, which is an off-premise advertising sign. So what we've done, instead of just taking continuous waiver applications to the Board of Adjustment or HARC, is actually come up with a text amendment within the zoning regulations that would allow existing signage that was put on a wall before 1966 to basically be refurbished in its original location with the same colors, the same size. The second part of this is to amend projecting signs. Within the last year or so, there was an amendment before the Planning Commission that allowed projecting signs in certain zones that really have buildings that were built right on the right-of-way, kind of like your downtown area on Broadway, and allowed them to project out into the right-of-way. With those text regulations, we wanted to come back and further define that a little bit further and put a maximum square feet of 6 square feet on those signs. I think an example of where you may see this is in the vicinity of the Coca-Cola building, for example. The reason the 6 feet, why we use the 6 feet, is that's the existing sign requirement that we use in our downtown historic district, which is along Broadway, basically from 7th Street to the river. So we thought for consistency, we would keep the signage in those other districts the same as the downtown areas. Most of the time when you see the older buildings on the right-of-way, they're very similar in age to a lot of the structures that we have downtown.
Thank you. Good explanation. Any questions, comments? The only comment that I had shared with Mr. Irvin earlier was in section F, where it says ghost signs should not be over-restored to the point that all evidence of their age is lost. I agree with this, but my question was, who would determine that? And he said he, as the person who will be overseeing the application, would be the person who would discuss that with the person who's coming to have the ghost sign restored. And I thought that was a good explanation, too.
I have one question about the ghost signs and one question about the projecting signs. Regarding the ghost signs, the year 1966, how was that derived? I assume that wasn't just arbitrarily.
No, it wasn't arbitrary. The 1966, if you look at the Secretary of Interior standards, and you also look at the National Park Service requirements for properties to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, it requires them to be a minimum of 50 years old. So we thought that 50 years old, at least the signage that was placed there then, has met that criteria to be actually placed on the National Historic Register of Historic Places.
So let's say in 2018, someone comes before you and they found a sign on their building that's 1967, would the regulation as written not allow them to define that as a go sign? Or I'm trying to anticipate potential amendments that we might have to make to it in the future, because if we're looking at it as we want to allow signs 50 years in the past.
The answer is no, they wouldn't be able to in 1967.
It might not ever even be an issue, because I think we know all the go signs that are there right now.
Well, I think most of the ghost signs that we would see are much older than 1966, so.
Well, I was mainly curious about the 1966, so you've answered my
Sure.
question on that, thank you. And then on the projecting signs in section 10, I think it's under K10, where it says projecting signs permitted pursuant to section C8 of the subchapter. I couldn't find, I don't know if I was looking at the right reference, but as it's printed in mine, C is titled General Regulations, and I didn't see any subsections under that. Is that actually subsection 8 under C? It's just not reproduced here?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was a correct reference.
And we will have that in the staff report in the
Yeah.
future.
And I have, just want to clarify, that you said the reason you came up with 6 square feet is that's what now is in the downtown. So therefore, there are no non-compliance over 6 square feet in the downtown?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Projecting signs were not even allowed on the Broadway corridor until probably 7 years ago. Before that, they were always required to be flush on the facade of all buildings. Many of the downtown property owners at that time approached the city
I
about
don't know of
allowing
any.
projecting signs.
It was,
I don't know of
it
any
was a
either.
question.
Yeah.
Well, because I want to get back to, those that are in non-compliance of the signage around Paducah, we have a tendency to not really enforce that real strictly. So therefore, I want to make sure that the downtown, if there is such a thing, that it would be.
Not aware of any.
Okay.
And it's possible that they're legally conforming, in other words, they understood the requirement and they went to the Board of Adjustment to get a dimensional variance. That does happen around town,
Okay.
but I can't remember one offhand downtown. Dan, one of the Board of Adjustment?
There may have been some recent, through the Harbor Board. I'm trying to think in the Market House area.
Steve, when I looked at the definition of sign and advertising, I don't know what tax company it is, but they have like a Statue of Liberty person. They're walking with a sign.
Yeah.
Is that in any definition that we have as a city?
I believe if it's a person that is walking with a sign attached to them, that's legal, I believe. I would have to check on that and get back with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you say it was illegal?
legal, not illegal, but please let me check into that. I don't want to give a false
Would that be
impression.
considered a temporary sign as opposed to a permanent sign? Is that how that's
That's
interpreted?
what I was getting at. How do we define that? Because that's,
I would imagine that wouldn't fall under the planning and zoning regulations, since it's not.
I'm not sure if it has to do with, freedom of speech or what you're getting into, but I know that has been researched. Can't give you the answer right now. Once again, I'd have to get back with you.
I just see that Statue of Liberty type person is advertising for the tax company off AC
That may be
Mathis.
outside the city limits too.
No, it's on
There
AC
is one in
Mathis.
the city.
They walk up
Or
and
has
down the
been.
street in a costume almost.
Are there any more comments, questions? Call the roll, please.
Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Benberry,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Chair Casillas.
Aye. Mr. Wade, you have the City of Paducah public hearing on the zoning text amendment, section 126, 108, downtown business town lift zone B2T.
You just read most of it.
There you go.
I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed proposed text amendment of the Paducah zoning ordinance by amending section 126-108 Downtown Business Town Lift Zone B2T be adopted.
Second.
Second by Ben Berry. Again, this is a public hearing, and so we welcome both. Any comments on this particular text amendment? Mr. Urban, do you have any comments?
Certainly, this is just more of a cleanup of existing regulations where it refers to parking regulations in two separate places for our downtown business district, which is B2T. We're amending it to one section that requires parking for 4 or more units in public places in close proximity or private lots, not a strict requirement. And the purpose of that is that in the historic downtown built environment, it was constructed before the invent of the automobile. Therefore, we want to encourage, and one of the priorities of Paducah Main Street is to encourage upper story residential in our downtown zoning district. Matter of fact, we have a goal of approximately doubling our downtown residential dwellings in the next 5 or so years. So if you required to have off-street parking to meet the requirements, it would almost encourage demolition in some senses, and we certainly don't want to see that. We want to see increased vitality in our downtown, which includes people living downtown.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions? Call the roll, please.
Yes, ma'am. Wade,
Aye.
Ben Berry,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Chair Crecilius.
Aye. Ms. Schramke, I'm sorry, you have the City of Paducah public hearing on the zoning text amendment, section 12664, lots.
I do have that. I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah zoning ordinance by amending section 126-64 lots be adopted."
Second.
Second by Shadle. Again, this is a public hearing, and we welcome all comments. Mr. Irvin, do you have any comments?
Yes, if you'd like.
Thank you.
What we've noticed over the last several years, right now, if you went on the city's website, there is a surplus property listing where you can get online and look at 40 or 50 properties that the city has owned. They've received them by gifts, or sometimes we foreclosed on, but we have properties. And the goal of that is so the city doesn't have to continue to maintain them, is to transfer them to somebody. And hopefully that's for new infill construction, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it may be an adjacent property owner that wants to keep that to enlarge their yard, for a garage, for a variety of things. That helps the city by us not having to maintain it. Presently, if someone wanted to purchase the lot adjacent to them, they would have to abolish the interior property line to create one lot, because you can't have an accessory structure on a separate lot around town. That's going to stay in place for the most part, but one thing that we would like to change is for an accessory structure, for instance, a garage. If you want to build a garage, we're going to let you keep the property line in place if you're building directly adjacent and it's in the same ownership. And the purpose of that is that they can build the garage towards the rear of the property where garages usually are. But in 5 or 10 years from now, if somebody actually wanted to sell that adjacent property, they could sell the lot still because the lot line exists. And then they could, to somebody that wanted to build new infill construction, and they would have the garage still in the rear. So it's just, we're trying to not totally do away with the density in some of our neighborhoods, which we've seen happening.
Thank
And
you.
it also saves them the cost of a survey.
Yes, it does. Yes. Any more comments or questions?
Is there any negative to the city if somebody doesn't? You know, they for whatever reason, one property is conveyed off, but the other perhaps even could be conveyed to someone totally different. There's no linking, is there any negative in not linking those
Not that
like we
I'm
do
aware of,
now?
Not that I'm aware of, because Where they would build on that adjacent lot, they would still have to meet all the yard setbacks of that lot, meaning side yard.
But there's no requirement that they have to build upon that lot in which that accessory structure
No,
is located.
no, and they could sell it to somebody, a neighbor or a family member, whoever, and they could build another house on that,
Or not.
or not, or they could keep it for themselves as,
Okay.
they usually do by abolishing that interior property line.
And therefore, by abolishing that line, the properties are linked. That's where I'm trying to find out, is there any negatives of not requiring that linking? Okay. And I think you've answered, there's not.
No.
Okay.
I think what he's trying to get at too is that the city doesn't have to maintain the property, that someone can build on that lot, can sell it later if they want to,
Well-
but they have to maintain it.
Right. And I've always taken it the intention was not to have orphan structures.
That's correct. But in this instance, it has to be by this ordinance related to the principal structure by ownership. They have to live there and they have to,
So it starts out correctly, but it could drift apart later. We have no control over that.
yeah, and that's the intent of it. We'd like that at some point in the future. Or them to have the ability to sell it to somebody that would build a new structure up front,
Or not.
or not.
Or not.
And
It
this,
is gray after it's built.
and this particular lot, would they have to build on it? Or could they just have it as a separate
No.
lot?
No. No, would not have to build on it. Right now, we could transfer the lot to them,
Right,
and just like any other lot, and they could use it for gardening or whatever.
they just have to maintain it.
It's just really when they build a garage, before they can get a building permit, they have to abolish that interior property line, which does away really with any future possibilities of redevelopment.
Then if they decided later at some point that they wanted to sell the lot, then they'd have to reestablish the property line before they could sell it.
But
If
we
they
wouldn't
meet the-
allow that.
Well, if they met the minimum size requirements.
Sure.
Some of these lots are existing non-conforming, and they could never reestablish
That's
that
true.
property line.
Especially in the historic zones,
Some
they're much
zones,
smaller.
It definitely helps the density. I think we'll see more structures built.
Yeah, and as start looking at neighborhood development, when you go back in, you try to reestablish these neighborhoods, even with new infill construction. It's interesting, within the last month, we started looking at just neighborhoods, and the neighborhood in between Fountain Avenue and Lowertown, there's 300 parcels in that neighborhood, there's 150 vacant lots. So when you start talking about new infill construction or neighborhood redevelopment, you're talking about a lot of new infill construction. So, and when you start talking about new infill construction, you want to keep the character of the existing neighborhood. And densities has a lot to do with that, because you don't want suburban-type lots in an historic built environment. It just doesn't look right. So that's one of the keys of trying to keep as much as you can, some of the original lot size and patterns within neighborhoods.
Thank you. Excellent explanation. Any other comments? Call the roll, please.
Schramke,
Aye.
Shadle,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
Benberry,
Aye.
Bradbury,
Bradford. Aye.
that was my mistake, it's written on here correctly. Chair Casillas.
Aye. Mr. Bradford, I believe you have the City of Paducah public hearing, zoning text amendment, section 126-86, accessory structures.
I do.
I move that a resolution entitled, "A Resolution Constituting the Final Report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the Proposed Text Amendment of the Paducah Zoning Ordinance by amending section 126-86, accessory structures be adopted."
Second.
Second by Schramke. Again, this is a public hearing. We welcome all input. Mr. Irvin, do you have any input for us?
I think I pretty much covered
Okay.
already. If you have any questions, though, please ask.
Any comments? Questions?
So this is the type of accessory structures, am I right?
I'm sorry?
This is the type of accessory structures, or no? Making laws.
I'm not understanding the question, I'm sorry.
This one is included in the last one.
Yes, it's
All right.
it's more of just, it's many a different section, but to accomplish the same
Gotcha.
purpose.
comments, questions? Call the roll, please.
Bradford,
Aye.
Schramke,
Aye.
Jadel,
Aye.
Wade,
Aye.
and Barry.
Aye.
Chair Casillas.
Aye. Is there any other business to come before the commission tonight? If not, we stand adjourned.